Hi, my name is Jenna Roller, and this is my presentation of the historical timeline of education for English language learners. Let's get right into it, and my first point is the California Proposition 227. This was a proposition that was placed on a California ballot in 1998, specifically on June 2nd was when it was passed. It was passed with a 61 majority percent vote, and this proposition required limited English proficient students to be taught in English-only classes, which eliminated bilingual classes in California, and also forced students who were in focus classes out of their programs after only 1 year of instruction. Overall, this proposition impacted the education of English language learners by removing them from bilingual special education classes and forced these students into regular education courses. There was a small decrease in the performance gap between native English speakers and English language learners because of this proposition. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the National Defense Education Act of 1958. This was the first official act towards advancements in English and education subjects such as mathematics, science, foreign languages, and this act was actually passed after Sputnik launched, and the U.S. was feeling pressure to advance in education. It was intended to improve and promote post-secondary education by providing loans and scholarships to students who were pursuing teaching certificates focusing on subjects, including foreign languages. This was passed on September 2nd, 1958, at a U.S. National level. This act impacted many people, and it really impacted the education of English language learners because it was a huge step towards building the importance and focus of ESL education. The next act I'm going to talk about today is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act was a huge turning point in the history of the United States. This act ensured nobody could be discriminated against due to race, sex, color, or national origin. This act was very important to the education of English language learners because it banned students from being discriminated against in their schools. This act was passed at a U.S. National level legislation on July 2nd, 1964. This act impacted many different people, including different people of ages, races, ethnic backgrounds, and even religions. Due to this widespread impact, this was really considered a pivotal point in American history. Overall, this act impacted not only the civil rights of the students in the United States, but it also impacted the education of English language learners. My next point to talk about today is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. This act was put into place to fight against poverty and signify the United States' commitment to equal access of education. This act was passed by Lyndon B. Johnson on April 9th, 1965, at a United States national level legislation. This act affected really a lot of children in the United States. By encouraging equal access to education, we as a nation ensured more students the opportunity to learn, whether they were English language learners or not. Overall, this act impacted the education and the future of many students in the United States, simply by providing additional funding for schools with high percentage of low-income students. This act enabled many schools to better service students and provide them with these interventions that they really needed, such as math, science, and the English language arts. My next point to talk about is the Bilingual Education Act. This act was passed on January 2nd, 1968, also passed by Lyndon B. Johnson. Since this was passed in January, this was the first act that he passed in 1968. This act was passed in support of the education of limited English-speaking ability students, or LESA students. This act was actually an amendment to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that we previously discussed. This was the first federal act signed into law which was to benefit of these LESA students. This act was meant to provide funds through grants to school districts in order to better serve these students. This act affected how people in a variety of different ways. First of all, this act provided better opportunities for education of these LESA students, and it also provided school districts with the funds they really needed to give these students these quality education. Brown versus Board of Education is the first case I'm going to talk about, and this name was actually given to 5 different court cases across the United States between the time periods of 1954 and 1955. These cases argued that separate but equal education was in fact not equal at all. These cases proved or provided that minority students was not the same quality education received by the majority students, and that these groups were being discriminated against. These cases impacted students across the nation of all races, colors, and ethnicities, and provided them with equal opportunities for quality education. These court cases severely impacted the future of education for all students, not just students in the minority. My next court case that I'm going to talk about today is Law versus Nichols. This court case was influential in the advancement for education of language minority students in the United States. This act was passed January 21st, 1974. This court case occurred January 21st, 1974, and it happened in the United States Supreme Court. This case stated that each student brings with them strengths and weaknesses in regard to education, and that these students should not be discriminated against or penalized because of these weaknesses that they might have as English language learners. This court case impacted many students, including English language learners, as well as English proficient students. While the majority of students were largely impacted, included students from ethnic and racial backgrounds. Students were affected by this court case directly through the provision that they must receive equal education as students who were English proficient. This court case provided that these students must not be discriminated against because of their racial background. And the next one I'm going to talk about is really a hot topic in the United States and has been for quite some time. And this is the No Child Left Behind Act, which was passed under the Obama administration in 2001. It was really a reauthorization of the ESEA, or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which we again previously discussed, that was passed by Lyndon B. Johnson. And this No Child Left Behind Act really was meant to reauthorize this act to improve the educational outcomes for all students across the nation, not just English language learners. This act provided that these students would be given the accessibility and the quality of equal education as the children who were affected by poverty. The next court case I'm going to talk about today is the Castaneda versus Pickard court case. This was the next case that had occurred after Law versus Nichols, which really impacted the future of ELLs in the United States. This court case was filed by parents of Mexican American students in Texas, and it occurred on August 17th, 1978. The parents believed that their children were being discriminated against due to their race or ethnicity, and were being separated into different groups based on these racial aspects. While this court case was overturned, it was ruled that the students did not have any constitutional rights taken away. Therefore, it was not a violation of the law. So these English language learners were not directly impacted. However, it did bring more awareness to the idea that these ELLs did need the help, and they did not need to be discriminated against. And finally, the last point I have today is the Equal Education Opportunities Act of 1974. This was a federal act focusing on the treatment of special population students, such as students with disabilities or English language learners. This act provided staff, faculty, and students could not be discriminated against in school districts and given equal opportunities in education. This was a national level legislation again, and occurred in 1974, as the name suggests. This act really impacted the education of many students in the United States, and it also impacted not only the students but also the staff and the faculty who were ELLs or could be discriminated against based on their race. Thank you for listening to my presentation today. Here are all my citations for all the resources I used to create this presentation, and I really hope you enjoyed listening to my presentation about these 10 different aspects of education of English language learners in the United States. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.